it's very difficult, for example, for, let's say, a white working class Brit to be constantly told that they are right wing, they are, a little Adolf Hitler in the making, when all they're trying to do is voice concerns about, for example, the safety aspect of what they see essentially on the streets. So can you tell us like a little bit more about how you see the impact on these smaller towns, smaller communities, and why is it that they are so disproportionately affected?
Yes. Well, you're right to say, people level the accusation, well, it's just anecdotes and where's your data? But actually, these are anecdotes that have only really started to be spoken about over the last 30 or so years, since 1997, which is when mass immigration really did start to ramp up. I mean, we've had what I would regard as mass immigration, which is to say tens of thousands of people coming into Britain since the end of the Second World War. But it was after 1997 that it ramped up to the hundreds of thousands, and then, of course, over the last couple of years into the millions, which is, historically speaking, unprecedented and absolutely mad. But in terms of the crime that mass migration brings, the statistic that the Centre for Migration Control, my organisation, has unearthed is that migrants are 34% more likely to commit crimes than native Britons. And that is an absolutely insane statistic. We have 10,000 foreign nationals currently in our prisons. And as you say, Keir Starmer is prepared to release offenders, some of whom are violent, some of whom have committed things like sexual assault. He's prepared to release those people early in order to make space for what amount to political prisoners, these people who were arrested during the riots, oftentimes for things as innocuous as Facebook posts. But he's not prepared to deport the 10,000 foreign criminals who are currently in our prisons. There needs to be a conversation about this, because it's obvious to everybody who is prepared to think seriously about this and who is not blinded by this kind of fear of being called racist or by liberal ideology, that mass migration does bring crime. It brings division, it brings tension, all of these things. And that's not even to mention things like the grooming gangs all up and down Britain, which is a problem that is still ongoing today. And which when this period of history, I like to think about how this period of history will be reported in, 200 years' time, when our descendants are being taught about what was going on in the early part of the 21st century. There was a period in the 21st century where mass rape of young native British girls was going on, primarily by Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. And every person in an official position, from the lowest level of the police force right the way up to elected members of parliament, saw fit to cover it up because they were scared of being called racist and they were scared of causing division. That should be a scandal of international proportions. That is tantamount to a crime against humanity, as far as I'm concerned. This is some of the darkest stuff that has ever happened on the British Isles. And yet there's still not really any kind of mainstream dialogue about this. I mean, people talk about it, of course, and there is, there are reports coming out, news stories on a fairly regular basis now about the prosecution of the people involved in this. But until there is a full-scale inquiry and every last person involved, as I say, from the police officers up right the way through to the elected representatives who were involved in covering this up and facilitating it, until each and every one of those people are behind bars, then justice will not have been served. And that is just one example of something that it didn't have to be this way. The British people were never asked whether they wanted to invite that kind of thing into their communities. It was imposed on them. And at every turn, the British public have voted against mass migration. And at every turn, it has been further, more and more intensified. And that's a real problem, which is why parties like Reform are coming to the fore. And that's good. But once again, whether we will really see a solution to this problem in the near future is not yet clear.
Mm-hmm. And I think there was a statistic that I've heard recently that something like 75% of the jobs that were created since, 2010, 2008, you might know that 75% of the new jobs actually went to the immigrants.
This is true, yes. Yes.
And it's just beyond me. Like, I'm Polish and I'm living here and I'm grateful for all the opportunities, but it angers me so much because I don't think that I should be getting treatment any better before the Brit.
Mm, mm.
Like, the fundamental responsibility of the country is to look after its own citizens.
Yes.
Like, if you don't have that, what are you?
Mm. This is the thing, right? There is an absolutely enormous bank of data that is just waiting to be sifted through and dug through when it comes to the consequences of mass migration. And that is at the Centre for Migration Control, what we're trying to do. So I'll give you another statistic on that topic. In order for a migrant, or indeed anybody in Britain, to break even, as it were, which is to say contribute more to the system than they're taking out, you need to earn about £39,000 a year, okay? And when I say taking from the system, I'm talking about the average rate of use of the NHS, roads, schools, everything that our tax money goes to fund. Okay, in order to break even, migrants have to earn over £39,000, and only 29% of migrants achieve this. And that's a real problem, because that means that what we have invited in as a nation is an enormous class, an enormous number of dependents. And that can't be right, because for decades we've been told that without mass migration, our economy would collapse. You know, we need mass migration for the NHS and for all this sort of thing, when actually the reality of the situation, and this has been shown in a recent report by the Office for Budget Responsibility, and before that a report by Tory leadership candidate Robert Jenrick and Neil O'Brien MP, is that mass immigration has had this enormously negative impact on the economy of Britain. Now, you know, I think the average person is not really won over by appeals to, again, ultimately profit and loss. But this is a very important aspect of this problem. You know, if it is the case that mass migration is costing us huge amounts of money, millions, billions of pounds, then it can't be allowed to continue. It's absurd. What's the purpose of it if not that? Now, of course, there are deeper consequences of mass migration, like the things I've said about already: the destruction of local communities, the tension that it causes, the crime, and so on. But this is the point: it's such a multifaceted problem, and we're only just now coming to grips with just the scale of the damage that it's done.